Welcome to Sleuth TV Live. Now, you might be excited to track DORA metrics and you're thinking, okay, I want to go use these things, but what you haven't ever thought is how important is it how you track these? How important is accuracy in tracking DORA metrics? Now, you might be thinking coming from a co-founder of a company that our marketing slogan is, we are the most accurate DORA metrics tracker. You might be thinking that I'm going to say absolutely important is accuracy, but you would be wrong. We are here to talk about, does accuracy matter? Now, as I mentioned in the intro, I am a biased person to talk about this, having owned a company that talks about accuracy and DORA metrics, but it's not as simple as that. As I said, the answers might surprise you. To give a little bit of context, so for the last season, well, also the first season of this show, we've been talking specifically about the DORA metrics. We've been talking what they are, how to use them, their history. Have we done pitfalls of them? Ooh, that might be a good future topic. Anyways, we're talking about different topics around it. And so today we're talking about the accuracy. So when you're measuring, how important it is to measure accurately. And as I said, you might think the answer is, of course it's accurate. Accuracy is important, but that's not true. And in fact, there was this great meme that I just cannot help but show you. This one, it was on Reddit yesterday. It's so perfect. Say the line, senior developer. It depends. And everybody cheers. Because if you ever interact with senior developers, that is how they work. There is no answer is yes or no. It's, it depends. Tell me more. Tell me the context. Is microservices right? Is monolith right? Whatever, whatever. So accuracy is actually very straightforward, is very similar in that it depends. So let's start at the beginning. So the DORA metrics, which again, just to summarize, come from the State of DevOps report. There's also a book called Accelerate, and it is a measurement of engineering efficiency. They surveyed 30,000 organizations and found that these four metrics, if you scored a certain way on these four metrics, you were statistically more likely, strongly correlated to organizations that achieve their business goals. I'm trying to think of how to put that more simply, which I totally should be right now, but it's basically, if you do well on these metrics, you do better as a company. How about that? Explain it like I'm 5. It comes from this study. So what's interesting about this, and I think you probably figured it out from my description, but where did these metrics come from? These metrics are not a study group that put a tool into the development process of 30,000 organizations to precisely, accurately measure these four numbers. Instead, it was done as a survey. They surveyed 30,000 organizations and asked them, how many times do you deploy? They asked them, how long does it take to get a deployment out to production? They asked them, when you do deploy, how often does it fail? And when you fail, how quickly do you recover? They asked them those questions in a survey. People responded. And so they put all that data together and came up with these metrics and found all of these insights, these academic insights. In fact, I've heard that word recently, that it's an academic thing, which is true, So if you simply turned around as a leader of an organization, you turned around to your managers, your team leads, tech leads, whatever, and simply asked them, how often you're deploying, how often is it failing, and so on, your information would be collected in the exact same manner as this study that created the DORA metrics. So therefore, one could conclude that if you're just interested in knowing kind of where you sit in this DORA metrics, you don't have to buy any tools, build any tools, do anything more complicated than simply asking people where they are. And from that, you'll have some information to baseline against DORA metrics. So I think that's probably my first answer. My first answer is from the standpoint of the DORA metrics, getting the same information in the same way that the survey was conducted, accuracy doesn't matter at all. Now, that is kind of interesting to know where you sit and how you compare to other teams. But this is where I want to kind of break away from the script, break away from going into kind of the prepared notes type thing, the talking points. And I want to open the doors into my team and how we work. So instead of talking about DORA metrics saying the accuracy is important and here's 5 reasons why and kind of going down that route, instead, I want to turn it around and say, hey, I'm pretty new to this DORA metrics for the last about year or so. I want to tell you what I have found useful, and does accuracy matter in that process? Because really that's what we're all here for, right? It's not about hitting certain, adopting the latest technology or something like that. At the end of the day, we're all trying to improve our teams. We're trying to do better with what we have happier people, that sort of thing. So it's all about what does it actually mean to me and to you. So I thought, instead of, as I said, going through slides like I did last time, I'm just going to talk about the DORA metrics and what I learned from it. And so to do that, I'm going to share with you our information from our DORA metrics, my DORA metrics, if you will. So we'll start over here. Now, as you might imagine, that I'm going to show you with my tool, but since I'm sharing you my experience, of course it's going to be with the tool that I supplied. But this isn't a sales pitch. This is just me looking at my data. In fact, actually, this data can be viewed by you. So if you're interested, you can go to our website and click on live demo and see this exact view of data, minus the edit buttons, of course. You can see all the exact same thing, and it's not perfect. What's also interesting about this is, as I'm going to walk through and talk about how I look at this information, how I use it on a day-to-day basis, you are getting the current information. This isn't previous information. This is exactly what I'm looking at, the raw opinions, if you will. So when you're looking at the DORA metrics, this is generally what you're going to be wanting to look at. You're going to be looking at what your number is. You know, what's my frequency rate? What's my lead time, my failure rate, my MTTR? It's nice to know if it's going up or down. In this case, our frequency is going down, which is a little bit disconcerting, but it's 12%. I'm not too sad. Lead time is getting longer, which is not good. And then it goes into more detail. So when I think about how I use the DORA metrics, you might think that this is my homepage. I start here every single day. I want to know what my DORA metrics are before I start my day. That's not true. I do not start at the DORA metrics. I start, sadly, on email and Slack and support tickets and things like that. The DORA metrics are useful for me in 2 ways, how I start. One is we have certain alerts that set up when things are not going right. And that's useful to know when something is wrong and I need to dig in more. And the other thing is when I already have a suspicion of something being wrong and I want to find out the data behind it. And I think that's probably something that is probably not understood as much. Sometimes when you're talking about metrics, the message can be, oh, measure it and you'll solve your problems. And my answer, and I think I've said it before on this show, I believe that metrics don't give you the answer. The metrics help you know what questions to ask to get a useful answer. And so in that context, when I look at this information, I will hopefully come up with questions, not answers. So let's take this information and let's zoom it out into a quarter. And in fact, actually, I'm going to go out much farther than that. And we're going to go out the last couple years, because when we talk about kind of a reason why you'd look at the DORA metrics, my company's grown a lot. We started really small, us 3 co-founders, and we've expanded and expanded. Now we have a bunch of devs coming on. So my concern when I go to the metrics, the questions that I want to have answered are all around, how is my team doing at scale? Are we still efficient? Are we still getting things out quickly? Are we breaking things more or less? So that's kind of the question that I start looking into the metrics to find out better questions. So like, for example, here's an interesting one. So we're looking at the last 1.5 years of data. And what you can see is a deployment frequency, 6.23. If you remember correctly from the previous one, it was 5. So we've actually gone slightly down in the number of changes that have gone out. And that's really interesting, because if you would have asked me, how is my deployment frequency, I probably would have said, we're probably doing a little bit better because we have more people and whatnot. That's not true. And I think this is where you get to, does accuracy matter? For me, accuracy matters because I'm often wrong. My assumptions on things, oh, I think something, and so therefore it's probably right, is almost always wrong. And as I've said before, anyone who has ever done performance optimization on a large system or even a small piece of code knows that your assumptions going in are almost always wrong. And then you do an experiment and you go, oh, wow, that wasn't it at all. It was something completely different. So does accuracy matter? I would say in this case, yes, because I cannot just go by my assumptions, what you would have asked me, but I actually go to the data. And then now I'm starting to realize actual information. So that already kind of gets into how the deployment frequency is going over time. The other thing to note here is when we're measuring deployment frequency, we're measuring code that actually hits production. We're not measuring when a pull request is merged and assuming it went to production. I want to know, for example, is my team batching things up and doing gigantic deploys, and we're not doing too many, which is good? Or is my team keeping things small? Because the size of the deployment, also seen in the State of DevOps report, corresponds to better DORA metrics. So that's really useful information to not just guess at when a deployment happens, but know precisely when it happens and what's in it, the size of it. That can, again, help me make better information. So when I go from this view back to, say, the month-long view, I'd say, do we have a lot of gigantic deploys? Do we not? And in fact, you know what? I'm just going to go to it. Let's go back to, let's say, the last month. And you can see that we're keeping the gigantic deploys down. So good. That's not something I worry about. So as when I think out of my deployment frequency not getting super better, not getting more, it's not because of gigantic deploys. Awesome. So I can dig further. I would probably be able to continue talking about this for hours, as you might have guessed, but I do want to bring Kate on. I want to make a couple more points, though, on the accuracy, and one of those is going to be in lead time. If you're looking at how long it takes to go from a change all the way out to production, that's a really important thing to know and track over time. As I'm adding more and more people to my team, are we getting slower and slower? Are things stuck in review more and more? These are very interesting questions. And if you look at it, holy cow. So again, I haven't practiced or even looked at this, this data in this way. The answer is yes, 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 yes. So in the last month, we've added a few developers, and you can see that our review time has gone up a bunch. And this is, again, where we're talking about accuracy. It's one thing to note at the top line number. The top line number is up a little bit. Okay, so I might say, 18 hours to 1 day, 5 hours. That's not terrible. Don't worry about it. But if you're measuring it accurately and able to break it down further, you can look and say, oh, wow, actually, my review time has gone way up, 159%. That's really interesting. And then I can just click on that in this particular case. Obviously, every tool is a little bit different. And I can see that it's been happening more and more frequently, and we have a giant bump right here. So then the question is, what's going on there? And I can dig in. And this is a really fun one. I'm going to throw my co-founder under the bus on this one, because when we talk about our change lead time and getting worse, we're sorting all of our deploys by change lead time. At the very top is one that took 4 days and 4 hours. Who authored that change? Well, that would be my co-founder, Dylan Etkin. He did. So Dylan, in case you don't know, he is a longtime Atlassian like me. He has been coding for ages. He was a first Jira architect, excellent technical person, developer, and then architect, and then moved more into management in the last little while. Well, when he started this project on Sleuth, he went back into dev mode, did some great work. But as we've grown, he's stepped away from dev and is now doing, CEO things, which means that he is not familiar with how we do development and things. So if you look into this even more, you can see that why did this take 4 days? It was in review for 3 days and 15 hours, which might indicate to me that, Dylan didn't quite code that exactly up to our standards, or he might have missed something, or whatever the case is. That is really interesting to me. So in this particular case, actually, the accuracy helped me determine that actually that was a one-off. I'm not super worried about it. So then I can go back to the data and I can say, okay, what else is going on? And I can see everybody else is, here, let me zoom into the review time. I can see that the review time isn't as massive problem as I thought. And see, that's really interesting, where, again, sometimes you come in with an assumption, oh, it's those new devs, they're taking forever, they're doing the wrong thing, we have to correct their code all the time. And it turned out the exact opposite. It was one of the founders who was stuck in review. Now, I'm not saying it's his fault. It could be that no one got around to it, or it could be that he didn't have time to develop it. In fact, I think that's actually the case in this one. I think it's that he had developed it, we had approved it, but he didn't merge it for a while because he was stuck in meetings, CEO stuff. So not calling anyone out, but it's an interesting example of the ability, because you're able to be accurate on this stuff, you're able to dig down and ask better questions. Why this? Why this? Why? And dig until you can find answers. Sometimes the answers are just, it's a one-off. Dylan did a thing and that's cool and we're happy and we move on. Sometimes it's something more systemic, but you don't know if you don't have the accuracy. So again, I don't want to keep talking about this. I really want to bring Kate on. She is much more interesting than me. But I want the takeaway to be understood that accuracy is not important. If you just want to know your number and see where you sit, you don't need to buy a tool. You don't need to build a bunch of tooling. You don't need to do a bunch of instrumentation. You can keep it simple and ask people and get a good feel for things. So don't feel like, oh, DORA metrics is only for rich teams or whatever. That's not true. It's for everybody. We can all learn something. But if you want to go deeper and deeper and get those deeper insights to actually change things, then I would argue the more accurate they are, the more effective you will be in that pursuit. Now, the much more interesting part of the show where I stop talking and we bring in someone who has news stories. And I am so excited to introduce Kate Bierbaum to the show. Welcome, Kate.
Did you say my name wrong on purpose?
Bierbaum? Didn't I get that? Bierbaum?
Bierbaum.
Bierbaum. God damn it. The joys of doing it live. You know what? This is the thing. Okay, here's my excuse. When you read things all day long, you don't ever pronounce them, and so you pronounce them incorrectly. So, sorry. That's.
Oh no! It's totally fine.
No. Instead, we are here talking about DORA metrics and accuracy. So when I talked about it, I was explaining kind of my experience. Oh, there's one thing I wanted to share with you. I don't even think you have seen this, which you might find interesting. There's a little story that I wanted to talk about. DORA, or Sleuth in the beginning, didn't track DORA metrics. We switched to that about a year and a half ago or so. When we first started, we were a deployment tracker. The idea was that we wanted to be able to help teams know what shipped when. As you go to continuous deployment, things ship and more. And this is our early, nope, not that one. This is our early website. Let's see if I can find it. I pulled it up. Nope, not that one. Not that one. This one. Our early website of Sleuth, where we were all about continuous delivery and continuous deployment, trying to help people do that. Fun times. But the reason why I say that is because that means I'm about a year and a half new to DORA. The principles behind DORA, I've been a huge fan of my whole career. Empowering developers, helping them ship to production, owning their changes. But you are even newer than that. So I gave my impression of DORA, having done it for a year or 2 years or so now, from knowing the metrics. You're brand new at the company, right?
Brand new. Yeah. In fact, I think when you texted me to kind of chat about what Sleuth was doing, I went down a Google rabbit hole of learning all the things. I had kind of heard about it, but not used it in practice, and so super unfamiliar up until fairly recently.
And to be clear, when you talk about when you did the research, that wasn't in asking to be part of this show. That was asking when I was talking about hiring you.
Correct.
Just for clarification for the audience.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
DORA metrics is stupid, but I have to talk about it. So I guess I got to figure out what it is.
Yeah. No. Back when we first started talking about joining Sleuth.
Yeah. So as someone who's been doing it or involved in metrics for about a month or so, what's your takeaway so far?
So far, actually, when you were digging through the live demo, the two things that you brought up were the two things I was like, these have been the top of mind for me for the last since I joined, because it reflects what's happening on the engineering team, change lead time and the frequency changes that you saw. We've got a new team spinning up, and no, it is not in Sleuth yet. Got to make that happen. but and the whole engineering team as a whole is growing. So we've got new engineers who've joined, and it's like these things are totally natural for like lead time to increase and frequency to decrease because of those factors. So like that's what I have been focused on. So like as it's pretty intuitive that like when you onboard to a new code base, there's a ton of discovery that happens, a lot of experimentation to figure out like where to make your changes to like get the intended results of your code. So, and when a new team's created, people are also figuring each other out and trying to like work together, the whole forming, storming, and norming of a team. So, like together, we all have to figure out what processes work best. So, as as this happens, like clearly, it takes a little longer to get the context and of the work at hand, and sometimes it's initially slow, but it's like it's been really reassuring to have like my intuition around those things checked by data, because in the like in my past it's just like, oh yes, well this is a theorem and QED because I saw it, but here's some numbers that prove the thing. um and it's been really important for me because it has been that opportunity to ask like deeper questions and get to a process that will help the team mature and move quickly with the right context.
Yep, that's a good point. There's something that I totally forgot to intro about you, which is really important here. Kate has been doing engineering management for a while in roles that are way beyond from management side that I ever got into. Engineering director and head of engineering now at places like Salesforce, of Twitter, Lever. Did I miss some?
No,
No, that's about
yeah,
right. Yeah, long time Salesforce though. I think you were longer at Salesforce than I was at Atlassian. How many years were you at
mm,
Salesforce?
9 years.
9. Okay, so I did beat you. All right. But you've been kind of on that management side kind of for a long time. So that's really interesting kind of to hear kind of what you find interesting. I tend to come from a dev side, so I'm more like, what tool can I build to write this? How do we get things out and things like that, where you're looking kind of more at the team and how to get that team productive, which, I think when you talk about engineering leadership, both perspectives, that's why I'm interested to have you, because you can kind of give that other perspective on things. When you looked kind of at this DORA mention, I think you kind of answered it, but I just kind of wanted to hear it again. When you look at adopting DORA metrics or just kind of that kind of approach on things, what do you think is like the lowest hanging fruit? Like if you kind of came into a team and you said, I'm going to make a big difference, and you've probably done this many times in your career, coming in as a manager, wanting to change something and really improve the team, kind of what's the first thing that you look at?
So it's interesting. I think when you join as a new manager, the first like at least my first rule is like you don't make those wide sweeping changes immediately. Actually, what you do is ask a lot of questions to figure out like what reality is. Um, and interestingly, like Sleuth as a tool has shortcut a lot of the answers to like some very basic questions, which is lovely because then I feel like you can dive into the more in-depth conversations quicker. Like some of it's super surface level and simplistic, like what metrics are important to the team, and like boom, I can just go into Sleuth and see what's being measured from our impact sources. Like lovely. But all of those things like usually would take a fair amount of digging, a conversation with multiple people, and then you can start to figure like what cultural and automation things need to change in order to like improve as a group. So like in the case of this higher change lead time, like just seeing that it's there, it led to some conversations with the people who are joining the new team, and how can we bring the context so that way we can bring that lead time down. So we just started doing a kickoff every week to align on the work, make sure that it's understood, make sure that acceptance criteria is on things, because that was super valuable information from these new engineers. Like a lot of people have been at the company for a long time, so they didn't really need it, but these new people did, and so we changed the process, and hopefully we'll start to see that number come down.
Yeah, that's a good point on kind of how it's not just about, and one thing I guess to note in what you said in all of that, it wasn't like, oh, my number was a 5 and I'm trying to get it to a 6. It wasn't about the metric itself. It was about the kind of change to help the people. And then the metric just helped inform that process. And I think that's something that often people get kind of backward. They think it's all about, hitting these numbers so that I hit my OKR and so that I get a raise and move on. And it's, no, that's the opposite. It's the goal is to improve the team or make them more efficient. And this helps you become more informed so that you're spending your time, your corrective measures on the right things. It's easy to do corrective measures, but if you're not doing a corrective measure on something that's going to make a difference, then you're kind of wasting people's time.
Well said.
Now oh yeah, I was going to say one thing when you kind of talked about the when you start a new job and you need these numbers. It reminds me when I was the chief architect for a company, a startup. I remember I came and I think the list, it was like 60 item questions. Like I want to know how often you deploy. I want to know how long it takes to get things out. I want to know what are the key numbers you're looking at when you're talking about production. I want to know, all these things. And I remember I spent like at least a month or two just talking to people trying to get manual answers to these things. And of course, that's a one-time answer that doesn't, get automatically updated. It's just this one-time snapshot. But you kind of need that when you're coming in because, at least in my case, like when you come in, like I know what I like and I know what works. And the temptation is I'm going to take all the 5 things that I know or I like and I'm going to make them work here. But that may or may not be what that team needs. They might, maybe they're fine deploying every month or so. They instead need to spend a lot more time on developer happiness and training. And, who knows what it is? You can't just assume that you have the answer when you don't know the question.
Yeah, that was even something we kind of talked about when I was interviewing too, because for a while I ran a CLI team, and I was like, "Yeah, we deployed once a week," and you're like, "Yeah, that sounds about right," because if you all deployed more than that, you would have driven me up a wall. Like I can't take updates that frequently.
Yep.
So
Yep.
yeah, just informing different things to measure.
I mean, that's a good point too. I was talking to a customer today and they were, talking about, it's how some teams are mobile teams. They can't deploy more than every couple weeks. If you're an enterprise software team that you do behind the firewall software, if you tried to give them a new version every week, your customers would shoot you in the head. Sometimes we would give them every 6 months and they would get annoyed at too many changes. Like, they just want a certain type of thing. So yeah, the metrics, I think again, it's easy to say this is the answer. And it's like, oh, this is the answer for a certain set of questions and it can help and inform. So the context is important. And actually that kind of leads into my next question. And I know you're new at all this, but I'm really curious on kind of your raw feedback, your raw thoughts. When a new technology is adopted, the temptation is this is the answer and it solves all the problems. Oh, we now know DORA metrics. Oh, we just solved DORA metrics and now we understand. Now we can measure engineering and we can walk away and be done. And I think anyone that has been doing it knows that that's not true. I'm curious, like, what have you seen around engineering efficiency that DORA metrics actually doesn't really help with?
Well, for one, like team happiness. I mean, I think it's a cyclical thing though, kind of chicken and the egg, like teams that are performing, like delivering value to their business, uh, um, they are happy, but just because you have metrics that show you're performing doesn't mean that you are. Um, and there's a lot of fuzzier ways to get to the heart of developer happiness, that don't involve the hard numbers of like DORA.
I'm curious on
Sorry,
that. Oh,
yeah.
sorry. I didn't know if you were done.
Oh no. No, no, no. Yeah, no, I figured you didn't. And I was like, I'm trying to think of how to describe it accurately. And I've done a lot of things in the past. I mean, there's been like team surveys that we've used, just conversations, overall company surveys, what comes out of retrospectives and how like that information kind of
Oh, that
changes
one's a
over
really good
time.
one. Yeah.
Yeah, the the level of detail that comes out during those conversations really hints on like what is top of mind for the team and how it's impacting their work, and like when you're down in the weeds and stuff that like at a higher level doesn't matter, like that's kind of a signal that people aren't actually doing that well, for example, to me anyway.
Yep. Yep. That makes sense. So, we mentioned already that you are new to the DORA metrics thing, but you've been doing engineering management for ages, trying to create productive teams. Prior to DORA metrics, I'm kind of curious on a little before and after, and I think I structured that wrong. Probably should have done the before and then we did the after, but whatever. We're doing before now. Prior to Sleuth and the DORA metrics, if you were looking at a team that you thought maybe was underperforming or whatever, or not where it should be, how did you know? I think you kind of alluded a little bit, like when you were talking about a new manager, but if you could just say more about that.
So I feel like this is like a show of hands moment. I'm like, hey, shout out to all the engineering managers out there who have made a bunch of spreadsheets and charts from work items. So
Oh my God, yes.
yeah, so using issue tracker data, commit stats, complexity of commits, like lines of code change, stories completed, bugs that have happened that have been tied to previous releases, and trying to piece that into something in order to ask intelligent questions of individuals. Um, Once upon a time, I did manually track review lag time. That was something that came up in a couple of retrospectives. Let's see, also tracking against company OKRs. Um, and yeah, then the developer happiness surveys that we've done in the past too. So yeah, a smattering of things.
God, I remember this one head of engineering, or what was he at the time? I think director of engineering. He had a spreadsheet that I swear to God had 150 different metrics that he tracked across all the different teams, and only about 10 to 20% of it was automated. And he just made it his mission to update that every single, I don't know if it was every week or it was every month, but something very frequently. It was very impressive, man. Looking at that, I'm like, I could see the potential of getting so much information here. But holy crap, that seems like a lot of work.
You're making my hands sweat just thinking about it.
I was actually on a sales call this morning. I don't know if it's a 6:30 sales call. I had one that early this morning, which is actually one of my later ones. And the guy started it. I'm like, oh, so how do you do this today? And he's like, well, you'll think I'm savvy. I have a Excel spreadsheet that does this and that and whatever. I'm like, dude, that's like half the people. Like what problem don't you start with? Oh, I bet I can make a spreadsheet for that, and then you later get, oh, let's not do that anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like it is a lens into the data, and it has been helpful, but not as helpful, I'd say, as using Sleuth has been for the last month.
Well, I think kind of the main thing there, other than the accuracy thing we were talking about, is just having something that just runs and not have to worry about it. The survey thing, as I said, it works great, and I know people that have worked that at very large companies. That's just part of their process. You do your status
Yep.
reports, you report on your 4 metrics, and you move on, and that kind of works for them. That's awesome, but that doesn't work for everybody. So
Yeah.
that's kind of a good point. Oh, and while I have you, so I'm curious. So again, this wealth of this experience that you have in the management field, but without the DORA metrics, what did you talk about when we talk about wanting to improve engineer efficiency, taking team from kind of point A to point B? You think back kind of on your experience. What would you say is a story? Because I love stories. As I said, I used to be a preacher. Preacher is all about stories. The material is 2,000 years old, 2 to 4 to 6, depending on who you talk to, 1,000 years old, and it ain't changing
Yeah.
anytime soon. So you have to tell new stories. I love stories. Tell me a story about a previous team that you worked with and that was maybe challenging, maybe not. It's up to you. That you turned around from efficiency standpoint, and what was your approach? What did you do? What did you learn?
So I was thinking about this. Luckily, I know you like to go off the cuff a little bit, so this one I got to think about in advance. Appreciate that.
Never. This is all scripted. I'm actually
Never.
just typed it all out, every word right here.
Well, so I was thinking about it and I was like, I don't think I've had a team that has ever just been like unproductive without having a cultural problem. Um, I think those have always been linked in my career. Like there's never been a case of just like, oh, if we had this automation or this other process, like we'll have higher output. Um, but one team that comes to mind in particular was like a group of people who really lacked empowerment and didn't have a say over like how their work was going to be done. It was like things were kind of fed in a like, hey, add X data in this format and then show it here. So like there wasn't like a lot of back and forth. Um, the process was very prescriptive, kind of working with a lot of folks who had been technical in the past, so they made a lot of assumptions. So the team also they didn't have context about like how this was important to the business or like the impact it was going to have on customers, nor how to do it. And like at the heart of things, like engineering is just a creative job. And when people feel stifled and like then they're not going to be happy and they're not going to be productive. So what was important here was like giving these group of people the space to own what they were doing and like and how it was going to happen and pushing back on a lot of like that the processes that led to the current state of things. So then eventually, like the group of people was able to come up with these new ideas, a lot like how things could be automated, how to remove drudgery from their day to day. And then because of that, like then productivity started to turn around. Like it was all linked. And I haven't found a case where that hasn't happened.
That's a great point. Shit, I mean, darn, we could do a whole topic on that one
I
just
know.
right there. Just how, if you have a dysfunctional thing, the answer is never start with tools. The answer is always start with people and culture. And then once you get them on board and going in the right direction and aligned, then finding a tool that can help take away and remove impediments and get that more automated, it's so much more effective. And I think that's too often lost. It's kind of like, oh, we want to move to CD, and so we need to drop these tools, we need to adopt this metric, whatever the new technology is, Kubernetes, whatever it is. That doesn't change anything. It's more that fundamental culture thing, which as a tool vendor, I found that terrible because I'd love to sell a tool that solves culture, but you just can't because people are complicated and whatever. But boy, I mean, if you just kind of think about that team maybe in your mind, and then you like contrast it with a team that's just crazy effective, um, what's the difference? I'll tell you mine. I won't say this is like my most unproductive team, but I will say that kind of one that stands out in my mind. And I was talking about this to somebody the other day. It was oddly enough a team of superstars, the best of the best in the company. This was a team where this is early days at Atlassian, early days, no, early-ish days at Atlassian. We went to Jira and said, who are the best people in Jira? Dylan was one of them, I might add. And went to Confluence, who's the best people of this? And it actually, and this one. And that team took a little while. Eventually it was great and we got a lot of stuff done. But it took a little while to build that culture because you can't just take a good person and another great person and just throw them in and expect great things. And I think this is my fault early on in the management career. I didn't really understand how important it was that that team gelled. I kind of think like an engineer, like, well, we have 5 things to do. You do 2 of them, you do one, and we all do our jobs and we'll go home. That's not how teams work. You need to create relationships. You need to, have a coffee together. You need to ask people questions about their life. They feel comfortable, so they feel energized, get them aligned, and then things change. So that was kind of funny when I think about the worst teams. It wasn't always just all the developers were bad. Although obviously if you have unproductive developers, you're gonna have a hard time. But sometimes you can have the same thing if you don't nail that culture part first.
I've worked on that team. That team was filled with principal engineers, and there was a lot of like arguing over ownership and like direction and technical decisions because like a lot of strong cooks in the kitchen. So which one is the head chef? Like, yeah,
Right, but then that doesn't really solve it either, saying this one is a head
no.
chef, because then now everyone else is resentful. Because again, if they're not all aligned and kind of in that right mindset of we're all trying to accomplish this, what can we do to solve it? All we care about is together, and you're my brother, sister, whatever, non-binary in arms, kind of going toward this thing. Like that's what's important, not the authority. You can't solve it with, I don't think, just military delegation. You're the general, you're the lieutenant, you're this, go.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't helping though. I 100% agree though.
So it would be better than where you were.
Yes.
But it wasn't. Yeah, no, I hear you. I was in kind of one of those teams where, yeah, it was like I was an architect. There was another architect, someone who thought they were an architect, and then a management team that was just like, I don't know, we're busy over here, and you're just like, okay. So there's a lot of herding cats trying to convince people, but everyone's convincing and no one's getting anything done. So that's interesting. Whereas I'm going to flip that around. And what would you say is a key ingredient to a team that was very productive, that did get it all together, that was going in the same direction, that was working well, delivering on their goals and the needs of the business? Who would you say is one of those stories?
Key ingredient to
And you should have a great answer for this, because this was totally in the list of questions I was going to ask you. And so you should be ready to go.
nuh-uh, it was not there. You flipper. No. No, I mean, I'm trying not to sound like trite and tell you that it's the opposite. It's when people they have they have the business context and autonomy over their work and feel empowered. But like that it's true. Like that's a lot of it. It's and it's also a lot of what is being driven from those key principles that you were kind of talking about at the beginning. Like you have you understand what's happening in production. You you see your work through. You have why can't I think of the right word? Not coming to me. That's okay. Um
Keep going.
okay. I'm really enjoying being live, by the way. It's super fun for
Isn't it
me.
just, it's a whole different experience.
It's a
It's like being on
whole different
Cops.
experience. Yeah. Except like more awkward.
Mm.
Um, yeah, I'd say uh, I can't get past like how important like the team gelling is. Like I feel like that is always like some part of the secret sauce as well as like that technical mastery. Um, and going back to your team of like, hey, there was a bunch of superstars and it totally flopped. Like, I also love a team that is a mix of different levels. Like, I feel like there's a really good symbiotic relationship that happens when you get like juniors, mid levels, seniors together, like, and everyone is learning and growing from each other and working together on a thing. Like, those have also been like some of my favorite teams.
Yeah, that's a great point. I was just thinking about the team gelling thing. I remember one of the lessons that I learned at Atlassian early on. Probably if I had to pick one smart thing I did there, I would say that was my smartest, which is I would go out with different groups of people on, I think it was Friday night. I had an agreement with the wife that she got to go out one night with her, maybe it was Thursday, one night and do her belly dancing classes and hang out with her friends or whatever. And I got to do one night at Atlassian, and I would spend that going out on the town in Sydney to a pub or something, and obviously make a fool of myself and whatnot. But the reason why that was the most brilliant thing is because I was interacting with people that I would interact with on a work basis, on a social basis, and we were creating bonds, we were creating stories, we were being stupid together, we were, talking about, how we grew up, whatever it is, it was creating those social relationships. Because I think, especially as an engineer, I completely undervalue the value. I have a tendency to undervalue the value of the relationship. Back in the day, we used to do a thing where, back in the preaching days, and we would, before you're going to try to tell someone about the gospel, you need to create a relationship. And the more I think about it, the more that's true. If I just came to you and said, Kate, you need to start doing this, you're going to be like, who the hell is this guy, and fuck off. I mean, go away. Whereas, I need a bleep button, damn it. We need a bleep. Whereas if we have a relationship socially, maybe pointed foam guns at each other or something like that, then you're going to take that in a different way, and it's going to be much more productive. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. I guess, started the conversation talking about metrics and getting all this hard data, and then going, as we keep talking about it, it all comes down to people. God, so many things just come down to people at the end of the day. Michael Knighton, by the way, one of my co-founders, he jumps in. I don't have the ability to put it up, but he says, and lose your backpack every Friday night at a different pub. And that is absolutely true. And in fact, even when I met the place before I worked here, where I was a chief architect, I went out with the VP of engineering as kind of an interview, not interview type thing. And sure enough, I left my backpack at a pub and realized an hour or two later and had to run back. So yes, but see, those are the stories, right? That's what you remember, and you create those bonds. So as a manager, it's almost, I mean, you can't fake those bonds and things. I guess we used to do that back in the day with trust falls and, like, oh, let's all sit on each other's laps in a circle and show how we need to work together.
Gross.
I don't think just always saying drinking's the answer is right either. A lot of people don't drink, have different social practices, things like that. So, but bottom line is social connections are important.
And it's been interesting joining a couple companies actually in like this remote space, and like realizing like the amount of time like that it takes, especially forming relationships with people over the internet, and like how to do that in a way that also isn't like impacting people's work. It's been a tricky balance. And I'm definitely looking forward to meeting everyone in person for sure. But I think the remote relationship forming has gone decently. Yeah, no, it all comes down to relationships. And it's funny, like that's one of the reasons I got into engineering management to begin with. Because at some point after being an IC, like the problems were slightly repetitive to me, and people are ever different.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes sense. It's kind of like, find what really works for you. For someone it's like that, someone else it's like the people freaking drive me nuts. Give me simple technical problems and I can just do those and it's nice and clean and easy and predictable. People are just, you never know what you're going to get. It's like a box of cherries. If I remember the quote like correctly, life is a box of cherries.
Chocolates.
Chocolates. Damn it. Box of chocolates. Watched that recently, by the way, with the kids. It was a lot of fun. All right. Well, as much as I would love to keep talking, because boy, that whole remote, building relationships remote, that's a whole fascinating topic that we could probably talk for a very long time on. I want to, I guess, to summarize kind of what we talked about the metrics, we talked about accuracy and how to dig and really how to change. And I think that's probably, I'd be curious to hear your closing thoughts in a second, but I would say my closing thoughts on this is when you're in the position of leadership in a team, you are responsible for how that team, at least in part, and how that team executes and how efficiently they execute. Metrics are a tool, accuracy metrics, being able to dig is a tool. And as we talked about, that's just one tool in the toolbox. We talked about relationships, how other things are important. So I guess what would be my number one takeaway? Number one takeaway is find the tool that works for you with what you need. If metrics is it, and you do need to dig in and actually look at review time and find ways to improve that, then yeah, find a tool that's accurate that's going to help you with that. If that's not your challenge, and your challenge is you have a bunch of people that hate each other, don't start with the tool. Start with, hell, maybe trust falls would be better at that point. I don't know. Something. What's your final thoughts there, Kate?
I'd say the most important thing is whatever tool or methodology you pick, like always have an eye for improvement, and building meaning with the people around you.
I like that. I like that. We're going to close on that word. So thank you very much, Kate, for coming. And thanks for all the chats, folks. Next week is the last Sleuth TV Live episode, where we will be finishing out this series on DORA metrics by looking at your DORA metrics journey. What happens when you're just getting started? What should you be thinking about when you've been at the DORA metrics for a couple weeks, a couple months, a couple years? What are the next steps that are appropriate for you and where you are? Hopefully some actionable insights to help you in your journey to improve team productivity. As I said, this will be the last episode. It'll be the same time. You can go to the URL that'll be linked soon to sign up. As I said, if you found this information interesting, please feel free to click the like button and comment. Let me know your thoughts. And thanks for joining us. Till next time.